Okay, good evening, everybody. Hi. It is really nice to see so many people here. Welcome. And welcome to tonight's Thursday night lecture, which this particular Thursday night actually takes the form of 3 presentations, all related to the exhibition upstairs in our gallery, titled Encounters, Denise Scott Brown's Photographs. And if you haven't seen it already, it is absolutely superb, and I look forward to you seeing it later at our reception and going back when it's a little less crowded and allowing yourselves to get a good deep look. Between roughly 1950 and 1970, as I have learned, Denise Scott Brown found for herself a way to look at that era's complicated world through photography, as Izzy says so intelligently. This also allowed her to probe what the architect's role in that world might be. The exhibition includes a wide range of her photographs that I think today actually help us see her interests in the so-called ordinary places of that time and the social obligations of design connected to that world. The exhibition also places Scott Brown's work in an expanded field, as it includes the work of other photographers and draws materials from several different archives. To discuss the show and Denise Scott Brown's work, we have 3 speakers tonight: the historian and theorist Joan Ockman, the Japanese architect Momoyo Kaijima, and the exhibition's curator Izzy Kornblatt. Speaking in reverse order, so first Izzy, then Momoyo, and then Joan, each will speak on Scott Brown and the exhibition from their own perspective, and then we'll have some questions from the audience to spur a further exchange. Let me very, very briefly speak about each of our participants, this time in the order they are actually speaking. Many of you know Izzy Kornblatt. He is a student in our PhD program in the history and theory of architecture. He is also a critic, historian, and designer. He is a contributing editor at Architectural Record. His work has also appeared in Architectural Review and in the New York Review of Architecture and Perspective, maybe? Paprika, maybe. Okay. He received his undergraduate degree from Swarthmore College and was studied at the GSD before coming to Yale. Momoyo Kaijima is a Japanese architect and co-founder of the architectural practice Atelier Bow-Wow. She completed her undergraduate studies at Japan's Women's University and her graduate work at the Tokyo Institute of Technology. She was a curator of the Japan Pavilion in the 2018 Venice Biennale, won the RIBA Prize in 2021, and is currently the Norman Foster Visiting Professor of Architectural Design here at Yale, a position she also held in 2023. In addition to designing award-winning buildings, she and her partner, Yoshiharu Tsukimoto, apologies for the pronunciation, are the authors of multiple books, including Pet Architecture, Graphic Anatomy, and the Architecture of Atelier Bow-Wow Behaviorology, published by Rizzoli in 2010. It's really great to have you back at Yale, Momoyo. Joan Ockman is also part of our Yale family. She was the Vincent Scully Visiting Professor of Architectural History and director of our PhD program for 5 years, from 2020 through 2024. She has a Bachelor of Architecture from the Cooper Union and a BA from Harvard, and she is currently teaching at the University of Pennsylvania and Cooper Union. From 1994 to 2008, she served as the director of the Buell Center for the Study of American Architecture at Columbia. Among her many edited publications are the award-winning anthology Architecture Culture 1943 to 1968, The Pragmatist Imagination, Thinking About Things in the Making, and Architecture School, 3 Centuries of Educating Architects in North America. She was honored by the American Institute of Architects for Collaborative Achievement in 2003 and named a Fellow of the Society of Architectural Historians in 2017. Denise Scott Brown is not with us in person tonight, but I am happy to note, and I assume Izzy's going to touch on this in a little bit more detail, that at the age of 94, she continues to hold conversations with designers and scholars interested in all aspects of her work. So please join me in welcoming our 3 speakers, and Izzy's going to kick it off.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dean Burke, for the generous introduction, and to all of you for joining tonight. It means so much to me to be able to present this work here at Yale, in Hastings, on a Thursday evening, with family, friends, and colleagues in the audience. This is my academic home, and so much of the project came out of classes, conversations, work sessions with many of you who are here tonight. In a few moments, I'm going to speak about how encounters, in both book and exhibition form, came to be. But first, I want to acknowledge the many people who worked on and supported the project, the people whose efforts made the exhibition happen, and who collectively are its authors. First, our extraordinarily capable curatorial and design team, Yashin Liu, Ugin Yonton, Peter Shu, and Milo Bonacci. YSOA's exhibition staff, especially Andrew Benner, whose guidance and insights were invaluable, and Allison Walsh and the installation team, who took on all manner of challenges with skill and creativity. Dean Burke supported us in bringing the project to Yale, believed in us, and gave some very good design advice. Elise Jaffe and Jeffrey Brown offered essential support. Lars Mueller, who unfortunately couldn't make it tonight, was the force behind the book. Shilpa Mehta and Bill Whitaker contributed to both the book and the exhibition in too many ways to count. Judy Dittner offered much-needed counsel and helped us secure important loans from the Yale Art Gallery. Momoyo Kaijima and Joan Ockman, two people I admire enormously, not only agreed to participate tonight, but have supported the project in different ways. I'm particularly grateful to Joan, who has been and continues to be a mentor to me in my work. Thank you, as always, to my family and friends for your patience, kindness, and wisdom, and to the many other people who contributed in different ways. I can't list all the names now, but many are up on the screen. And finally, I owe a tremendous debt to Denise Scott Brown for her generosity with her work and her time. It's been a privilege to learn from her and to work alongside her, and I hope she is as proud of the book and exhibition that resulted as I am. Encounters presents photographs taken between the 1950s and the 1970s, as Dean Burke said, the critical period during which Denise departed her childhood home of Johannesburg to study in London, traveled in Europe, moved to Philadelphia, developed a profound interest in so-called ordinary environments that drove her work on places like Las Vegas and Levittown, and eventually married Bob Venturi and joined him in practice. Not coincidentally, this is also the period of her life on which Denise herself has focused much of her thought over the past decade. In lectures and presentations, and in an unfinished book manuscript, Denise has used her rich collection of photographs both to reflect upon her life's trajectory and to make claims in favor of her own design techniques and approaches. Encounters is deliberately very different. It started as a book project developed through a series of working sessions at Denise's house in summer 2024, during which Denise and I pored over hundreds of her photographs, so many of which prompted her to remember pieces of her past, stories, fragments, characters major and minor, moments that in retrospect took on great meaning. Playing on the rooftop of the Corbusian Johannesburg home that was commissioned by her mother Phyllis, photographing pigeons in the Piazza San Marco in Venice with Robert Scott Brown, her first husband who died in 1959, a day spent walking around London to look at Hawksmoor churches with her sister Ruth, who she complained had a habit of stealing her boyfriends. The book that we produced is, I think, distinctive in an important way. Like most other critics and historians, I'm accustomed to working independently, accountable to myself and my audiences, but not connected intimately to my subjects. So when I agreed to undertake this book, I set out to establish my independence. I wasn't willing to have my text subject to prior review. I was determined to create something with critical force. We never abandoned those aims. The book intentionally does not repeat Denise's own well-rehearsed interpretation of her work, which can be found in numerous other places. Yet our book does not take a researcher's dispassionate view either. It's something else, something produced out of a gentle push and pull between the view from inside, Denise's, with all the memories, intentions, ideas that surround these photographs, and the view from outside, mine, with the observations, interests, critical questions of one who did not experience what is recorded in the images and who instead sees them from the view of the present. Appropriately, the thematic sequence of photographs and encounters traverses both the well-known aspects of Denise's life and career, including like the photos including like the photo seen here at right, which appeared on the cover of Architectural Forum in 1968, and the less known ones. Some of the photographs in the book seize and pull forward a history that disturbs and upsets, one that is not confined to the professional world of architecture and planning, but is linked more broadly to social injustice and more intimately, too, to the personal relationships that structured Denise's life. South Africa, where Denise was raised and remained until leaving to study in London in the 1950s, and which she photographed both while living there and on a series of trips home over the subsequent years, emerges as one of the most difficult subjects in Encounters. Denise remembers South Africa as a place of landscapes lovely beyond all singing of it, a phrase she borrowed from Alan Paton's Cry the Beloved Country. And if her photographs of these places reflect the complex politics of her own position as a white, liberal Jewish woman making her way in an apartheid state, they are also charged with personal significance. Based on the stories that Denise told me, we were able to find unpublished photographs of this place, Oribi Gorge, which Denise vividly remembers exploring with Robert Scott Brown in the early years of their relationship. More than any other event, it was Robert's death that marked Denise's break with South Africa, and it was important to Denise from the beginning to remember and honor him in the book. Okay, so long story short, by June of last year, we had a book of some 400 photographs accompanied by an essay I authored about the complexities of seeking to learn from ordinary places. And we had the idea that doing an exhibition might be interesting. But how to transform this series of facing pages, this linear sequence of images on bound sheets of paper, into spatial form? Just as challenging, how to do justice within an exhibition to photographs that were not intended to be received as artworks, photographs that were taken by an architect and planner who, in her words, used photography to illustrate the ideas behind what I teach, design, and write. Naturally, we started by iterating. Maybe the linear sequence of images would fragment across folding. Yes. Maybe the linear sequence of images would fragment across folding walls arrayed throughout the gallery, or maybe each chapter of the book would live in its own enclosed room. Or, we wondered, what if we built a theater in the middle of the gallery to project the sequence of images in the book? And if so, could we then place around it a variety of materials from outside the book that would, in a way, expand the scope of the project? The vote was unanimous for this final option, which also offered the opportunity to engage playfully with the formal and material qualities of this building, to build a structure that would work both with and against Paul Rudolph, which we started to explore in this initial provocation rendering. In place of the vast open space of the gallery, our design creates a set of defined rooms. The obvious one at the center, which is the projection theater, but also a set of rooms around the gallery's perimeter that are defined by the edges of this new volume. In the darkened theater, rendered in blue, the sequence of the book is translated almost directly into the images that are projected on two adjacent screens, angled like the open pages of a book. In this way, the sequence that Denise helped shape, that reflects the back and forth between us, is given immersive theatrical form in a space totally unlike the rest of the gallery and building, separated from the outside by curtains, covered with a fabric ceiling, filled with the quiet hum of the projector's fans. It's a space that we hope invites lingering, and one that encourages you to sit and take in this work in a comfortable way, at the large scale that works so well with these images. Our use of 35mm slides, projected via 2 Kodak projectors that we bought on eBay, is of course deliberate. These photographs are Denise's slides. They're working images used extensively in her teaching. And while we weren't trying to recreate a classroom, we found the format effective in bringing the photographs to life. In fact, while working on the show, we learned that one of the first exhibitions that Denise and Bob did together was a small show in the late 1960s in Philadelphia in which a number of Denise's slides were projected at large scale in darkened rooms, which was interesting. Around the theater, the perimeter rooms are spaces where we go into depth with particular aspects of Denise's work, in each case pairing it with work by other photographers, and in the process raising questions and problems that, we hope, help audiences rethink the significance of Denise's photography for the present. So whereas the theater is all-encompassing, these spaces ask visitors to draw connections, to make comparisons, to be critical and analytical. They also presented a curatorial opportunity to exhibit material that is singular, rarely seen, and in some cases has never before been shown publicly. And we're very grateful to the architectural archives of the University of Pennsylvania, the Yale Art Gallery, Temple University, Denise herself, and the others who lent the work on display. Our aim was to arrange that material spatially in a way that draws multiple threads through and across it. The first room deals with Denise's use of photography in her planning work through one specific project, the community planning effort she led for Philadelphia's South Street in the late 1960s. Here, Denise's photographs of street life are shown alongside Ed Ruscha's Every Building on the Sunset Strip, a book that led Denise to create her own Ruscha elevations, as she called them, in numerous planning projects. We also have this yellow poster opposing the bulldozing of South Street, likely one of the last of these posters in existence, tattered from its usage at protests. A 40-foot-long vitrine links together the South Street room with a room on the Learning from Las Vegas studio. No surprise. On the Las Vegas side, it is filled with original archival documents, which are especially interesting to look at from the point of view of those of us involved in studios today, along with student work and the poster lent to us by Denise herself that advertised the final presentation in this building in January 1969. In conversation with Denise's earlier photos of Las Vegas, this room seeks to explore photography as a pedagogical tool for Denise. A small room dedicated to Robert Scott Brown includes his photos along with Denise's, illustrating how Robert got Denise interested in photography and how it became a shared pursuit for the two of them, especially in their travels. Our room addressing Denise's photographs of South Africa pairs her work with several photographs by the South African photographer David Goldblatt, whose early life had many similarities to Denise's and who was drawn to many of the same subjects she was. Through a series of side-by-side comparisons, we show the difference in how the two approached photography and raised questions about what is excluded in these views of South Africa and what it means for a photographer's relationship with her subjects to be caught up with power, which is a problem, of course, not only under apartheid, but in many other places where Denise photographed. Finally, our at-home room focuses on Denise's photographs of the places where she lived and relates these photographs to her design work, represented here not by buildings, but by this tableware that Denise and Bob designed for Swid Powell in the 1980s, as well as to contemporary photographs of Denise's home in Philadelphia that bring us into the present day. Of course, there's much more to the show, which I hope all of you will discover on your own. Fundamentally, though, what we tried to do in these rooms and throughout the exhibition was to balance the view from inside and the view from outside, to bring forward Denise's ideas and voice while retaining an independent curatorial view and opening space to ask questions and think differently about an architect whose impact on the profession has perhaps still not been fully understood. One final thought. We're very proud of the finished product, the finished exhibition, but in putting together this presentation, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something missing. And what I think that is the messy process of actually making a show. I'm not going to go into it in depth, but I do want to say that doing something like this is at its core a series of experiments in which countless people participate. It's stretching screen fabric and test-bending drywall, finding unexpected things in archives, jury-rigging vintage projectors that do not want to be synced with each other, figuring out how to build a 40-foot-long sealed vitrine, sewing curtains until minutes before Michael Maltzin gets up here, debating paint samples, trying out typefaces, collectively editing wall texts, drawing and redrawing elevations, discovering that applying metallic vinyl to a curving wall is exceedingly difficult. It was in that long and unusually hands-on process of making that we discovered what this show is. It was not about executing an already formed idea. It was through the process that we figured out the material and spatial relationships between objects, the qualities of the projections and of the theater itself, the sequencing of movement through the gallery, and so on. This was a very fun way to make an exhibition in which curation and design informed each other, and it's one that I think could only happen in architecture school. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Izzy so invited me to join, and Deborah, so thank you very much for beautiful introduction. The date is wrong, so sorry. So I misspelling totally February and not January today. So. The title of the architecture behaviorology, so it's framed by Atelier Bauer, and then so I was also a bit hesitated to show our photography work, but it's also maybe so it also help you to what the architects look to the world. So also the Denise photography was very beautiful, but also Atelier Bauer was also fascinating by her work. So that's why I want to share what we have. How do I click this one? Forward. A forward one. Don't. Oh, okay. So, what is the relationship with Dennis and also the Robert, Bob, and then also I have some opportunity to meet them so directly. So the 1991. So they published a book in Japan, and also that time, so they came to Japan to have a lecture, and then by coincidence, so we have a chance to meet, exchange. And then also they tried to visit Japan and Tokyo. So, and then 2009. So maybe it's right. So there is their house project so moving on the Hudson River, and then by coincidence we were also attend to this event, and then looking together the parallel. So the one pier and so the old so house was going to the river. And also the 2016, so there is one event in Montmartre and also the Pennsylvania. So, and then so the complexity, the contradiction. So the book was 50 years anniversary event. And then I was also attend as one panelist so of the talk, the show. And then also at the time, so we had a chance to talk with Denise and my partners, Yoshihara, had also the summer school one in Budapest. And then so they drink a lot and talk together. And Denise said, so, okay, please greet your partner. So yes, I did also. And then maybe so how the architecture behaviorology started, maybe so several history I tried to find out. But one book, it's published in 2006, the Post-Bubble City, so Atelier Bauer from Post-Bubble City. And because 1991, so when we started Japan, the bubble is collapsed. So that's why this is a moment our career started. And then so this book is showing on this topic, so how Japan, Atelier Bauer traveling to after this post-bubble scene. So, and then front page of this book is showing to the Roppongi crossing, after the World Cup soccer World Cup, the Japan team win the fastly in the World Cup, and then everybody becomes very crazy. And then normal crossing started to the high touch crossing. So, and then we were also the part, and we really excited to of course the winner atmosphere, but same time the crowds started to the very strange behavior to turn to the normal occasion to become a performance. So that's the books showing on this part. And then also our interest, of course, drawings a lot, but same times also the photograph can also explore some different topics. And then so the Echo of the Space and Space of the Echo, this book was published 2009. These books include many essays for observing of our ordinary life, how to do it. And then especially so first images this is access to my house on Atelier Bauer. And then we set up firstly to this concrete block more regular way, but we walk several times and already so started to rotate some part the irregularity. So that's why so that this was maybe like 4 years later, already like paved were changed by our daily walking path. So that's why we found interesting some new movement by the people behavior. So that's why that this photograph showing this behavior on that. And then end of this book, we also showed some collection of the behavior of the people. So that's titled the behavioral the forms. And then showing the several spread to the collection, the very different, sometimes a trip, or sometimes a daily life. And then the showing to the like how people behave or how the space and the tree, people gathering, or like how the sea coast collecting the interesting, the beach tent in Busan, or like we at the time, we traveling a lot to participate in the international art show and also the research project. So that's why many photographers coming by this trip and journeys to discover the very interesting topics. And then Brazil and China, Tehran and Istanbul, and also to France or Nordic country, the Amsterdam, and so on. So we also tried to how rich the behavior of each context were very different and diverse. So that's also intention of the collection, this photograph. And then maybe it's too quick showing, so that's why this photograph, only 10 images were reframed on this another book. So Valerio Orgiati, Swiss architect, he tried to make an exhibition in Venice, 2013. And he asked us to collect send to the 10 images. And then we designed to the image of the architects. It should be also the one photograph of some images. The book is quite interesting, very well formulated. If you split it open, it's a square, and also photographs should be also square. So it's quite regulated. But I will show for example 10 images. Maybe you might understood what Audrey Bauer was doing. Like this is, for example, the Mont Blanc. So I went to with my family and Yoshi to go to some visit, and then how the mountain and how people spend a very beautiful shiny day, even if very cold, extremely cold weather. So that's contrast was very shocking, but same time we enjoy the sunlight. And another image is the Dubai airport. And then people needs to spend a lot of time for the waiting the transfer, so the next flight. And then the one area was totally many people sleeping around the corner. So that's also very interesting atmosphere and behaviors of the people. So we really also enjoy that. And another is a Chinese garden, so like a very famous garden. And then the zigzag corner, so the coming to the toward the pond, and then also the corner is also people occupy and to enjoy the totally expressed to the around the water. So this is another the loggia, Firenze, loggia, and then this case is also the very large loggia. But some in between the large statues, so people close by to sitting on the stairs. And another image is Hong Kong, so under the very famous Foster's the tower, and under this a lot of Philippine the background migration, the communities are gathering to exchange the information. And also they had some sort of the party, so chatting. So that's also very interesting for us to how the contrast of the building and also the liabilities on the place. And also that this is also the ruble, so some longer chairs or benches that everybody shocked by beautiful images and sitting aligning to the So that's a very interesting so for us how the images were so impressed the people to so much. And this is also the very famous Japanese temple, so Kiyomizu Temple, and it's elevated from the slope, very beautiful, so maple trees areas, and then people can enjoy and have floating, and everybody wants to coming to front, so on the bus tray. So that's also very interesting. And then we could see also the other side to this kind of theatrical effect was also very interesting for us. This is another Brazilian, so Ibirapuera Park, and then like in the shadow, and then aligning to the long benches, everybody sitting, and the backside is very, very so beautiful brightness. So that's also the very cozy shadow, create a nice temperature for the people to stay silent. So that's also for us also interesting, very impressive. So the architecture and also the park. Another image is the Nordic, some areas that had a beach culture at the short summer, so they come to the sunny side to the almost naked to express their the body to get more sunlight, and it was also very beautiful thing for us to how everybody's open and enjoy the sun. This is also the one image is not so clear, so but this is a judo club, so judo club in the our campus, Tokyo Tech. So, and then when we see down to the campus green area, so everybody's doing to the judo. So it was also very interesting, beautiful images. And then, so these kind of observation by photograph, of course, the photograph reflect how Atelier Bauer look or observe the world. And then we also started to transfer to this, our eyes to bring some theory of the understanding the commonalities of the drawings. For example, this is one images, Copenhagen, so the bridge is also they had a very beautiful seating place in the end of the summer. And why it happened, so we observe carefully, and then this balustrade of the stone wall becomes good containing the heating, so from the sun. And then, so right side is a bit windy, so they need a jacket, but also the left side is more warm and heated. So that's why, so this meaning of how people gathering and the different kind of people in staying here, so that we try to draw, so to explain in the section 2. And then also this kind of behavior observation also bring to our public space design. So this might be, so some people know this New York, so we did the Guggenheim BMW Guggenheim Labo 2011. The case is the park was not well organized at the time, so and then so that's why the lab tried to investigate with a theatrical tools on the toolbox we called to put in the one plot, and then from the toolbox the many things coming down to make some public action so in the program. And then so these kind of things also parallel, so we try to show by public drawing. So that means so the design observation is coming to also the design project, but also after we started to memorize and archive what we had. So this also one drawing done in 2012 so for the IEDES 1 year later of the event. And then on this case, we plot into the all site information and also the reading from what kind of event is there, and then to introduce on the drawing with collective drawings. So that is the last slide. So, but I also it's very interesting, the tools, the photography, and then this photograph and drawings. So Atriba was trying to back and forth to exchange and make a loop to the thinking. So that is also a reason of the we are very interested by the Denise photograph. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. Great to be back at Yale tonight, and big congratulations to Izzy, to Lars in absentia, to Yashun, who is also responsible for the design of this marvelous exhibition, and to Denise Scott Brown at 94 years old, really an institution almost. So what a fantastic exhibition. I was privileged to have a walkthrough by Izzy just a little while ago. And also what a splendid book, which is basically what I'll talk about tonight. And thank you for the nice introduction. So to begin by placing this somewhat unusual book in the category to which it belongs, let's identify it as a photo book, a particular genre of art publication that has acquired increasing currency in recent decades. The photo book is defined most simply as a concept-led book with more or less text that makes use of photography as its primary medium. What distinguishes the present example is that it's an architect's photo book. Of course, listening to Momoyo, so many of our books are photo books, I realize, but there is now this genre of the photo book, and I think it's interesting to think about this particular one that's just been published on Denise's photography in relation to it. But it wasn't put together by the photographer architect herself, as we know, but by a young scholar and critic, Izzy Kornblatt, with Denise's authorization and input, of course, with the enthusiastic support and imprimatur of the publisher, Lars Müller, and with valuable assistance from Venturi Scott Brown archivist Bill Whitaker. So Izzy sensitively contextualizes Denise's photographic practice in his introduction and in an essay titled In Search of the Ordinary. But obviously, what also unifies this compilation of images grouped under 7 rough thematic headings is the persona of the architect photographer herself. And with this publication, one might say that she implicitly stakes a claim to the artistry of her work, to being an auteur. In her sewn metal lecture in 2018, though, she stated, "I never thought of myself as a photographer, only as an architect and urbanist." Yet this new book arguably raises the question of how else to describe this body of work. And we should also mention that Scott Brown, I'm confused about what to call, I think I'm going to call her Denise, affectionately for most of this here. So Denise herself has for years been working on her own architect's photo book, one provocatively titled Wayward Eye. She intends it as a sui generis autobiography, and the images, including a much larger sampling than the 400 that we get in Izzy's book, are culled from her archive of some 11,000. And these images will also be accompanied by a major literary testament, we understand. So the culminating project of an extraordinary career, we look forward to its completion. But in the meantime, we're indeed fortunate to have the one at hand. But again, how exactly to characterize Denise's extensive and singular photographic practice? Tonight, riffing on the title of an essay that she wrote in the 1960s, Between Three Stools, the titular stools being architecture, urban planning, and teaching, I'm going to try to frame her work in relation to three kinds of photographic practices, likewise marked by complex and sometimes contradictory interrelationships. So the first frame is tourism, or more specifically, the architect as tourist. No doubt, when Denise left South Africa in the early 1950s as an architecture student bound for London to undertake a required internship at the AA, soon to be followed by her first husband-to-be, Robert Scott Brown, she was more than happy, indeed greatly excited, to become a tourist. The tourist, generally speaking, is characterized by curiosity about the world and a desire for new experiences. The tourist revels in encountering forms of otherness. For a young woman who grew up in Johannesburg, in the sheltered milieu of an affluent Jewish family with a taste for modern architecture, traveling through Europe and then the United States in the post-war decades certainly offered exhilarating new horizons, including, in due course, the exotic built environment she would encounter in the American West and Las Vegas, Nevada. But tourism is also inherently a privileged way of seeing the world. And in this respect, the tourist, unlike, say, the exile or the emigre, resembles the flaneur. She looks at places, but isn't of them. By definition, she remains distanced, an outsider, deterritorialized. As such, she roams cities and sites equipped not just with a map and a guidebook, but with the urge to capture her experiences in a more personal way and to understand them more deeply. The accumulation of self-taken images not only provides evidence of having been there, the sticker on the trunk, but of another kind of encounter, a deeper one, an imagistic one. Denise's early enthusiasm for photography seems in part to emerge from this intellectual condition. Of course, when the tourist is an architect, when she is an archi-tourist, as I call it, reenacting the venerable tradition of the Grand Tour, additional elements come into play. A more knowledgeable and informed observer than the everyday tourist, she's trained, or if an architecture student in training, to absorb what she sees in an expert way. She has eyes that see. And in the modern era, the camera, eventually digital, supersedes the pencil, crayon, or watercolor as essential, if sometimes cumbersome, equipment. A fulsome history of the modern architectural tourist has not yet been written. PhD students take note. The lineage would have to include the travel experiences of such figures as Le Corbusier and Eric Mendelsohn, of Aldo van Eyck and Bernard Rudofsky, of Denise Scott Brown and Rem Koolhaas, among the many architects who've taken both their travels and their cameras seriously and been transformed by them, often in profound ways. And this brings us to our second frame, namely photography as a form of research, as the acquisition of new knowledge and documentary evidence, as a production of images having not just exhibitionary value, and we'll come to that, but use value for the architect's future purposes. These purposes might be pedagogical, or they might be professional. And with this comes, in the present case, the trope made famous in Learning from Las Vegas, that of learning from. For Venturi Scott Brown, learning from comes with a particular twist. It involves learning to defer judgment. In other words, not arriving with preconceived ideas or conventional assumptions, maintaining an open mind about, say, Levittown or Co-op City or Main Street. The idea is that the only way really to learn from something is to be as objective as possible about it, allowing for the possibility that something initially antipathetic could have some virtue. This might result in the researcher coming to like something that he or she was initially primed to hate. And while doing so might also require a sense of irony, and we find this sensibility in the context of postmodernism for sure, the deferral of judgment becomes a pedagogical exercise in itself, maybe even the most valuable lesson that can be learned in the context of, say, a studio trip from an elite ivy-covered university to the polluted paradise of commercial pop culture that became a destination for Yale students in, of all years, 1968. But take note, deferring judgment is not the same as permanently suspending judgment. Ed Ruscha, a photographer whose work Denise credits as having had major impact on her vision and thinking, and one of the photographers she most admires, suspends judgment, using his deadpan style to shoot his chosen subjects, gas stations, buildings on Sunset Strip, dispassionately, in serial order, one thing after another. And we'll also return to Ruscha. The Venturis do not wish to suspend judgment, though, only to defer it. And this deferential attitude, or point of view, as expressed in Denise's photos, gives her images a certain gentleness, even if they are also manifestos of a radically different type of architectural vision. I think you can see that very well in the show. Deferring judgment self-evidently means postponing the verdict, presumably until one's had time to study the evidence closely, to consider all the factors that bear on a particular situation. It's at this moment, and only at this moment, that design can legitimately begin. Survey before plan, as the planner Patrick Geddes put it well before the Venturis came on the scene. Of course, Denise and Bob never make completely clear how this coming to judgment process actually unfolds. But what can sometimes appear with the Venturis to be ostentatiously iconoclastic and even deliberately perverse in their preferences is more than just devil's advocacy. It's a will to defamiliarize things so as to begin to approach them with fresh, unblinkered eyes. And this might even mean, as Denise puts it in one of her interviews, laughing not to cry. This order of operations is exactly the opposite, of course, from Venturi Scott Brown's contemporary, Peter Blake, who opens his 1964 photo book, God's Own Junkyard, with the statement, "This book is not written in anger, it's written in fury." That photograph of a chaotic streetscape in downtown New Orleans, which Blake counterposes to Thomas Jefferson's academical village on the first spread of the first chapter of the book, and which Robert Venturi then lifts and inserts into Complexity and Contradiction in Architecture as the last image, a parting shot, so to speak. That messy image of Main Street, USA, turns out to have real vitality. It's almost all right. Certainly the word almost is doing a lot of work here. Just imagine with a little tweaking by the architect. And here I'm reminded of another contemporary of the Venturis, the British townscaper, Ian Nairn, an editor at Architectural Review, creator of the Outrage section of that magazine, and coiner of the term subtopia, who in his American photo book, The American Landscape, A Critical View, 1965, based on a long road trip through the US, explicitly embraces everything Peter Blake hates, but unlike the Venturis, not in order to transvalue or emulate it, but to change it. At issue again is what to do with the research that the architect develops, pardon the pun, in the act of photographing places, of photography as a form of research preparatory to design. That book, yet to be written by a future architectural historian, needs to analyze the different uses that architects make of their photographs. How precisely does the architect translate the knowledge or insight she gleans from her images into a design project? And how does she transmit this knowledge to others through, as the case may be, lectures or exhibitions or photo books? Of course, sometimes the architect's photography merely serves the utilitarian purpose of being an aid to memory, a mode of visual note-taking. Denise admits to using photography for this purpose sometimes. While her first husband, Robert Scott Brown, was by all accounts as enthusiastic a photographer as she was and took lots of pictures of the places they visited together, their shared mantra was just shoot, Bob Venturi, in contrast, preferred not to carry a camera. When he wanted to remember something about a site or recall a particular detail, he would turn to Denise and instruct her to take a shot. On the other hand, an architect like Peter Smithson, whom Denise and her first husband encountered at the AA before coming to the U.S., used the photos he habitually took on preliminary site visits to improvise collages, using this surrogate form of sketching to jumpstart the design process. With more time, I would have made a larger survey of more of these practices, including, mentioned before, Aldo Van Eyck, the Smithson's Team 10 colleague, also a colleague of Denise's at Penn, who took an immersive and anthropological or ethnographic approach to his photography. For example, in the stunning images that he took of the Dogon people in Mali, in Africa, which were not only published in a long photo essay in Charles Jenks and George Baird's book Meaning in Architecture, but also filtered into his own architecture in poetic ways. And in contrast, the Austrian-born architect Bernard Rudowski, a peripatetic global traveler whose famous exhibition at MoMA, Architecture Without Architects, and its accompanying catalog, photo book, consisting of large-scale black and white photos with brief captions, usually one to a site, struck a particularly receptive chord in 1964 at a counterculture moment. Rudowski used the photo exhibition and the photo book to demonstrate the universality and diversity of the global village and to urge Western society to avail itself of the wisdom of so-called informal or non-pedigreed architecture. But in relation to the broad spectrum of research-oriented photographic practices honed by architects during the post-war period, at least, we should also note the concurrent burgeoning of a new media culture, one increasingly photo-intense, and expanding the aims of photography as architectural research with more and more elaborate techniques of not just shooting, but sorting, cataloging, archiving, and ultimately graphically assembling material into publications and shows. As I've argued elsewhere, architects are particularly adept at these ancillary tasks, which in our own time have tended to shade over into highly sophisticated forms of curation and packaging of information. It's especially interesting to think in this context then about Denise's aims for her own photography in relation to this historical evolution, inasmuch as her ambitions for her own work, beyond their use as teaching tools and adjuncts to the design process, the use of her photographs, were, as we've said, relatively modest. Also related to this was her pushback against the first graphically glorious publication of Learning from Las Vegas and her insistence that its re-edition, its second edition, be in a cheaper, student-affordable format. But this brings me to my third frame into the question of aesthetics, or in the case of Denise's work, anti-aesthetics. Given what we've just said, should we today interpret Denise's photography as an aesthetic practice? Is it art? While Denise still would more than likely disclaim aestheticization as an aim of her photography, and while she by no means chose her subject matter based on its inherent picturesqueness, in fact, as we've already suggested, the opposite, There's no denying that many of her images are beautiful. To pose the question more theoretically, can there be an aesthetic of the ordinary? Or is that an oxymoron? Isn't the ordinary, by definition, that which lacks aesthetic intentionality? Is beauty merely an incident in Denise's photography? It's worth recalling here Colin Rowe's critique of Bob Venturi's entry to the competition for the Yale Mathematics Building. How, Rowe asks, can a sophisticated architect, educated in one of the most elite professional institutions in the United States, intentionally design a dumb and ordinary building? Isn't this a conceit or affectation? In other words, what happens when the anti-aesthetic, when ugliness becomes a style, a cultivated manner in its own right? Lutyens' vindication of ugliness comes to mind, but aren't we also back to the avant-garde of modernism, to the deployment of shock as stock in trade, only now not so much for purposes of épater le bourgeois as épater highbrow taste? And at this point, doesn't anti-aestheticism become the flip side of aestheticism? To answer this, it might be helpful to know a little more about Denise's photographic techniques and to analyze some of the formal preferences that are discernible in her photographs. Apart from what kind of cameras and lenses she preferred, I'd like to know more about her framing and editing process. We don't get a lot of information about this in the present book. How much did she crop in the viewfinder? How much cropping did she do ex post facto, for example, when she was called upon to provide images for publication? Given that we're dealing with a practice polemically committed to reality, to is rather than ought, would not modifications of this, of the type we latter-day photoshoppers are intimately familiar with, wouldn't that be ethically out of bounds? The decision very early in her career to shoot in color rather than in black and white is telling, a refusal of aesthetic abstraction and an attempt to avoid any pretense of conscious artistry. And by the way, one thing that Izzy pointed out in the show, and that is very evident, is how the photographs by Denise that are in the show, and you'll recognize them this way, are left unframed, as opposed to those with grander pretensions, which are very nicely framed. Anyway, and her photos are always in color too. So we can contrast her polemical embrace of ordinariness with that of the new topographics photographers, including a professional like Stephen Shore, whom Denise and Bob commissioned to shoot the subjects that they selected for their show Signs of Life in 1976 at the Smithsonian. One can hardly question whether Stephen Shore's own photographs of ordinary or everyday landscapes is an aesthetic practice, despite, indeed by virtue of their subject matter, they find their place in the museum today. As for Denise's photos, the snapshot aesthetic that one might associate with photography of the ordinary is belied by her cultivation of the technique of the perfect moment, the seizing of serendipity, a technique she acknowledges having learned from another of her most admired photographers, Henri Cartier-Bresson. Thus, for purposes of a photo of a wall in Philadelphia scrawled with the graffiti, "I love you," it's in the show, she sat and waited, as she recounts, for that perfect moment, which duly occurred when two young girls showed up in the frame. We may also observe how carefully she composes many of her shots. Consciously or not, she frames many of them around a vertical center line and a horizontal landscape datum. To go back to a point we made earlier about distance, it's revealing how few close-ups there are in Izzy's book. Exceptions include some affectionate portraits of family members and friends, and also several pictures of children. Otherwise, her preferred point of view tends to be middle ground, close enough to satisfy her curiosity about a subject, but sufficiently at arm's length to allow for safe distancing and deferral of judgment. Let me conclude this slightly fragmented talk with a couple of final comparisons and questions. The first comparison is to Rem Koolhaas, an architect a dozen years younger than Denise. While Rem acknowledges, if somewhat left-handedly, his indebtedness to the Venturis' take on Las Vegas in a long interview that he conducts with them in his book, The Harvard Guide to Shopping, titled Relearning from Las Vegas, more concrete or visual evidence of this influence is manifest in his photo book, Great Leap Forward of 2000. The blurry, grainy photos in the book effectively capture China's hyper-accelerated modernization as witnessed on a studio trip to the Pearl River Delta taken with students enrolled in Harvard's Project on the City. Yet in a photo essay and 2 films on Lagos, Nigeria, based on another trip with Harvard students, Rem's aestheticized use of photography goes well beyond the attitude toward images adopted by the Venturis in Learning from Las Vegas. An urban environment that, when first viewed by the Dutch architect from a closed car window with a digital phone camera, appears to be total chaos and dysfunction, this image of Lagos gets resolved in exquisite kaleidoscopic patterns when subsequently shot from a helicopter, hovering 15,000 feet in the air, the helicopter having been rented from the Nigerian president for the purpose. The Dutch architect, Rem, and the South African one, Denise, share the perspective of the privileged outsider, the permanent foreigner, the iconoclastic archi-tourist flaneur, who is at the same time deeply dedicated to urban research. But while Denise strives to remain ideologically neutral in her judgment-deferred gaze, she nonetheless does not lack what she herself calls social concern. Rem's distancing, on the other hand, betrays a more, shall we call it, amoral politics. Image gathering for him becomes an end in itself. Research and knowledge ultimately geared to end up in a spectacular publication. This last point could use further elaboration, but I don't have time. But what I do want to suggest is implicitly addressed in my final comparison or question. Denise professes, as we've said, a deep appreciation for the photography of both Ed Ruscha and Henri Cartier-Bresson. Is it indeed possible to reconcile these two practices? Can one do both deadpan, even if it's partly ironic, and empathy? Can one be passionate about being dispassionate? Note that while Ruscha too favors a middle ground point of view, Cartier-Bresson, quintessential humanist that he is, gets up close and makes no bones about showing whose side he's on. Once again, deferring judgment seems to be dialectically related to its opposite. We'll leave it there. The images so handsomely presented in Izzy's book harbor provocative contradictions and complexities with respect to the architect's use of photography as a method, a medium, and a message. Avid architourist, persistent urban researcher, and amateur in the etymological sense of the fine art of photography. These 3 frames may be of use in reflecting further on Denise's unique body of photographic images, as well as that of other architect photographers. Thank you.
Very inspiring. Good.
Sure. Is this on? All right. Thank you, Joan and Momoyo. Since we don't have a lot of time, we're going to jump straight to Q&A from the audience, and we can take turns answering things, talk to each other. It can become a conversation with everyone in the room. So please, if you have questions, now is the time. Kyle?
Thank you very much. Thanks for a terrific set of talks. Do you have any favorite examples of occasions where photography ends up blinding the architect, or where you would find yourself preferring that thinking it might have been better for the architect photographer to stick with being just an architect?
Well, I don't know. Like many of you are architect or you study architecture, so maybe you need to archiving so many things. Now I think if Le Corbusier, at the times, he also more the sketches is a stronger method for the archiving. And then maybe 1960s or 50s, slowly to the more a hand camera, a tool becomes more a good tools for the sketchbooks. And then many architects try to also study to test the a more lightweight to the ordinary or more light things. And maybe now the mobile phones, so everybody take some chat. So that's why I don't know how much we thought professional tools as photography. So because today I show also the photograph, but some part is showing in some books, but I have a tons of photographs, but I never shown. Maybe just my memory. So that part is maybe also many architects had already, yes, no?
Yeah. No, I was really struck, Momoyo, when you showed the drawing that you made that was almost a perfect kind of translation from the photograph. And then, one can imagine it becoming a project. It's that process of translation and transmission that I think gets really complicated and sometimes distracting for the architect who is trying to focus on a project at hand rather than making images of, It's a good question. It's a good question. And I think Denise's reticence about making her own practice public or even, suggesting that it had some artistic value to it goes against the tide of a certain kind of spectacularization that we know very well these days.
Yeah, I think for me, it was not so much that the architect should go back to being an architect and not being a photographer, but more that there are moments, and I guess we can stick specifically with Denise for now, where the problems or risks of using photography are not fully dealt with. In working with Denise, especially with her photographs of South Africa, a lot of the stories behind them that kind of took a long time to come out, and the ways in which those photographs were used for many decades to illustrate lessons about how people use space or how settlements should be planned. The stories behind them are often quite disturbing, very go against a lot of that, and I think, but for Denise to see the photograph as just kind of objective evidence and use it that way, I felt like there could have been more reflection on that, and I think it's maybe the same with Rem and others, where the objectivity on the one hand and the spectacularization on the other can be traps. Mary?
I just have a question. Are they all slides? Did she ever, colored photography is very difficult to process, And I'm just thinking of two things. When I went to published, never printed, but he also took black and white photos. And I was wondering with Denise if there was anything other than slides, and how much so.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to that. There are kind of two collections of her work. There's the Denise Scott Brown Papers, which it's not like family photographs, but it's her personal collection. And then there's the Venturi Scott Brown Archive. So in the archives of the firm's projects, especially the planning projects, there are undoubtedly thousands of photographs taken by Denise. And there are negatives, there are slides, there are prints, there are all kinds of things. In Denise's papers, she kept slides. She has 11,000 slides. They're not fully processed. And she chose a subset of those to share with me, most of which had already been scanned.
But it just raises the issue of the limited control of slides. It's really just framing and light, catching it at the right moment, or as Joan said, that special moment. But I just think that's kind of interesting in itself. It's a kind of limited ability to control compared to the black and white photos in the exhibition.
Yeah, absolutely. Denise didn't develop her own color photographs. There are stories of her doing some developing of the earlier black and white photographs that she took when she was still using Robert Scott Brown's camera. But that was very early, and we don't have those as far as I'm aware. But yeah, she was taking these photographs, she was sending them out, and then she was keeping them and using them as slides, which is, of course, how we end up doing the same thing in the show. But I got very interested in that medium, and I came of age after the era of the slide projector, so I was learning to use them and fill them, and they go upside down, actually. I had a whole and backwards.
Use Mylar to help. The limit of framing was Mylar tape. If I didn't like the way my photo was framed, I'd leave.
Yeah.
I don't know if Denise taped her slides.
None that I saw.
No. I did.
Craig?
Thanks for wonderful talks, wonderful exhibition. Just to pick up a little bit on where that conversation is going, you've really pulled out not only a kind of exquisite testimony to Denise, but to a particular moment in time. And I'm wondering if we can think about both a moment in photographic history, a moment in architectural history, and what it means today when we're surrounded by photographs that don't have that same materiality, that are taken in very different ways, that are processed in different ways. What it means to look at this different era in which photography and architecture interacted in a very different manner.
Yeah, I think we wanted to raise questions about that. It's interesting that part of the way that Denise's photographs are often received is like as artifacts of nostalgia, like looking at the surfboards and on the beach in Santa Monica, these old cars, like the very texture of that. And we did lean into that a little bit in choosing to make slides again and get the projectors and work with them in that way. But within the context of the show, the intention was by putting the rooms outside where we have the new prints of her photographs in conversation with material from the time mostly, to historicize it, to contextualize it, and to maybe cut against just the nostalgic reading, but to start to place it in conversation with Rouchet, with David Goldblatt, with others.
Izzy, the framing dates are 1950 to 1970. 1950 is basically when she starts using the camera. 1970, she stops photographing then? Is that more or less the case?
So we have in the book photographs up until 77, but only 3 or 4 between 1970 and 1977. I mean, she comes back to Philadelphia, she gets married, she starts practicing full time, and she quickly becomes a partner. And at that point, the photography doesn't stop in the firm, but it's really picked up by other people. Steve Eisenhower, who's an important person at the firm, and she also has a son. So her life changes a lot, and the number of photographs just...
So she puts the camera down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
George?
One of the things that's interesting about this whole topic, and I come to you as a person who, for 15 years, lugged a view camera and sheet film on one shoulder and a bag on the other, and took maybe 5,000 4x5 photographs versus snapshots with the Nikon, until the digital Nikon came along that could give me enough DPI to use my perspective lens and get rid of the view camera. So she is shooting in a period when color is coming really to life. That there's the Agfa films that were kind of hot and the Kodachromes that are hot. And then in the 60s, Ektachrome comes in. And Ektachrome, by Kodak standards, was their optically most accurate film. But it was the hardest to shoot because it required almost perfect exposure. So that is, I think, one important point to look at. To me, I look at her photographs and I see them. I assume you had digital images made at 6400 DPI and got the prints that you did that held their detail pretty well. That's a very different thing from printing from a slide. So in a sense, you've already transmuted the image in a way that her images would never have done. So there's that piece that I think is important to get at. And then to realize, of course, that she didn't have the miracle of digital photography. I have 5,000 4x5 negatives, about 6,000 35 millimeter color slides, and in 10 years, 11,000 digital shots on my phone. And how different they are. You know, and if I look at my phone pics, maybe out of 10,000, there's 50 I'd show you. So that's, I think, you know, part of what she's looking at. The fact that she's working with that type of camera, that's itself a limitation that you work against. And she did very well.
Absolutely. Do we have time for one more? Okay. Sebastian, I know you have had your hand up.
Thank you so much for the lecture. It was amazing. I want to go back to the issue that Joan talked about the process of translating from the photo to the drawing. I also want to ask this to Momoyo because she's here and she showed this amazing axonometrics. How do you work with this challenge of like translating the observations of the behavior of people to the drawing, but also balancing it to the challenge of drawing and imagining and projecting how people are going to behave in this new project or this new architecture? So how much in your drawings is observation? How much is project or imagining what's going to happen?
Yes, thank you very much. A very good question. So, for example, like learning from Las Vegas, you know, that book, of course, like very important reference made in Tokyo, for example. Of course, you know, the format, but like also the way we made it, I think also the like only photograph is a bit, I feel, weak because like a photograph could not illustrate or translate it into the activities and also the like a kind of different junction. So that's why. So like I'm also me also very interested about the more wider view. So to more like a relationship between others. So that this brings to the diagrams expression. So we call to this line drawing, and a bit also we want to show the anonymity or banality. So by the computer line drawings to decreasing of the autograph part. So that's why, so like, this drawing is also like translated from the photograph to how to the object or research target should be expressed as a architectural discourse. And so that part is also very framed for the drawings. So that's this kind of like how we observe, and then maybe the drawing is also like a more translation into the more detail and also the resolution or perspective. There are a lot of things that we can more put in there. So that's why, for us also this drawing is quite helpful for go deeper to make an intention of our eyes and what we want to say. Then, of course, back to this again, to the observation. So that's endless, honestly.
That seems like a great place to conclude.